Well, I mean, if you look at major economic recessions of the past, it takes time for the labor market to recover a major shock. It's not unusual that you got a pickup in output and employment sort of is a lagging indicator. It takes much more time to recover. But I think another important point, and this is not true across the countries, is that major crises like the one we have seen tend to accelerate structural changes. There are cleansing effect. Basically, you got some firms that simply disappeared. They were not that viable before the crisis, and the crisis actually kicked them out of the market. So we have seen in the past that major crises like the one we have seen tend to generate a lot of job losses in companies that actually exit the market, and it takes time for the market to rebuild new activities, possibly in different sectors with different occupation. I think in Spain you have lost 25% of employment in construction. It's not obvious whether this 25% of employment can be regained anytime soon. The same to some extent in the United States and other countries. So I think this is the reason why there is a lag. But let's ask ourselves, was the situation in 2007 so good? I remember I was the editor of the Employment Outlook. In the 2008 edition of the Employment Outlook, we had in the editorial the level of employment rate, so the employment to working age population rate in 2007, so before the crisis, was at the highest level we ever seen in the OECD in the post-war period. So to some extent, the OECD country, with significant difference across the board, managed to bring more people into employment. Just a few months later, we published another book, Growing Unequal, with a question mark at the end. What that book said, as Carlo was saying before, in 2/3 of the OECD countries of the past 20 years, we have seen increase in income inequality. And why we have seen this increase in income inequality? Because we have seen significant increases in labor market conditions. So yes, we have managed to bring more people into employment, but also some of the jobs we have created were low-paid jobs, low productivity jobs. So we have seen at the same time more access to employment, a widening of labor market outcomes. So the situation, even before the crisis, was not ideal. What has happened during the crisis is that those who were into these more precarious, low-paid jobs were very badly hit by the crisis. So the inequalities that we had before the crisis in many OECD countries have increased even further. Because now we had people that before they had a job, maybe it was a precarious job, that have lost a job and they're back into unemployment. So to some extent, I think any policies going forward should look certainly at policies to strengthen job creation, but also look at the quality of jobs. And this, of course, requires structural policies that were mentioned. Let me say a few words on the policy response. I think on the encouraging side, we at OECD, since 2008, we have basically reviewed how countries were responding to the Great Recession. From the macro perspective, with the stabilization, with the stimulus packages, but also more on the micro side. And I think the good news is that most countries in the OECD have actually responded pretty aggressively also in terms of providing more resources for labor market programs and for social programs. They've certainly tried to provide more income support to the unemployed. In those countries where the duration of benefit was short, they've extended the duration. Many people were not eligible for benefits, and there's been attempts, including in Italy, to extend the coverage of benefit. And this certainly had a major impact in sustaining income for all of those affected by job losses. My concern now is that these programs have worked to help at the beginning the unemployed, but many, as I said before, of the unemployed have become long-term unemployed. And a number of them, even in those countries where duration of benefit is long, are at risk of losing the right to their traditional income support. So the question is that what we do to provide continued support to them, and in particular to focus on them for any re-employment policy that we can put in place. The other interesting thing, before the crisis, many countries have made effort to link better the income support on the one hand with a set of battery of re-employment services, training policies, job search assistance, and also subsidized employment. That was before the crisis. And this system, I think we have evidence from a number of countries, have worked pretty well in mobilizing people back to job. Basically moving to this philosophy of work first. You get into unemployment, you have to move back into employment as quickly as possible. This strategy, to some extent, entered into a little bit of a crisis during the recession because there were not that many jobs at the end of the road. So, I mean, you can mobilize people as much as you want, but if there are no jobs, we argue that it's important to keep this strategy in mind. And for those who have the most difficult situation going back by themselves into work, even continue to provide support, encourage job creation. How? Well, one of the strategies many countries, actually 16 of the OECD countries have done, is through some subsidy for job creation, basically subsidy for hiring of new workers and potentially marginal subsidies, so only for those companies that are expanding. That's, in our view, to the extent in which there are financial resources, a way to, again, try to move people back into job and avoid this large crowd of people in long-term unemployment. But I think there is a specific issue for young people. I think many of you have said, Carlos, and they need the specific attention. I mean, there are structural parts that have to put in place as well as measures that have to be put in place in the short run. Let me just focus on one for the sake of time, apprenticeships. Many OECD countries have made effort to try to facilitate the transition from school to work. This is essential. There are not that many jobs for young people, especially for low-skilled young people in the market today. It is very important to try, to the extent possible, to facilitate transition from school to work. Yes, we have to invest in education. We have to try to keep young people in school until they achieve a diploma that is valued by the market, but also for those who would exit the education system without very high level of skills, we need to provide support to them. If we look across the board, we find some countries, Germany, Austria, Denmark, others, that have much lower youth unemployment precisely because of a well-established system that allows young people to transit from school to work. A number of other countries are making effort, including Italy. This is essential and has to be done now. Adequate resources and a cooperation with firms. They have to understand that this is an investment in their future as well, because it's a way to get new people into their companies, invest on them, and then to some extent keep them even at the end of the apprenticeship. Let me stop here.
I have a couple of questions for you just for the last few minutes, then we will collect eventually two more from the floor. If I well understood what Carlos said and what you said also, is this is a long-term problem. It's not going to disappear even if the GDP goes back to the previous level. On the other hand, we would need a strong confidence in future, but as we don't have it because of the financial conditions, the debt, public and private debt still uncertain, and so on, there is a risk that companies will not invest. And so we will not have a boost, but just a slow recovery. So what can happen in the meantime? Beside policies that can stimulate and accelerate this process, how can we take care of those who have been pushed out of the market, especially young people, and where the social cohesion is at risk? I have two examples in mind from this point of view. The first one, what I understood India tried to put in place during the crisis. Instead of giving an unemployment subsidy, they gave an employment subsidy. So saying, this is a minimum wage. If you want to work, we will give you a certain amount of money. But you will work under the instruction of your community. So you will do something useful for your community instead of giving you a subsidy to stay at home. Is this something that we should look at? Second example, if we have a lot of inactive young people, should we think about programs like the compulsory civil service instead of the military service in order to keep people not just busy, but to stimulate the social cohesion for this particular cohort of people that is really at risk? Other questions or comments from the floor, please. Very short because we have 5 minutes left.
Yeah, Antonio Borghesi, member of the Italian Parliament. My question is very simple. In order to reduce the public deficit, we are obliged to maintain the people at work more time, more years. Probably this can reduce the possibility, the opportunities for young people. How to match the two problems, how to find an adequate trade-off on the two problems. Thank you.
Thank you. Last question or comment from the floor? Over there. Sorry, please.
Daniele Moscato, Unicredit. So talking about young people unemployment and try to connect with what Mr. Scarpetta said about apprentice. My question, may be stupid, is why not pushing it? So my question is, how would you see, so especially in those countries in which the unemployment level for young people is very low, to to do sort of a commitment between public and private sector to reach mandatory share of young employment.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Last question over there. Well, yes, please.